CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, joins us now. Margaret, thanks for being here. There are discussions happening at the Biden White House about whether to send top U.S. officials to Ukraine. President Biden said this morning that his administration is, quote, making that decision now. Why would that be significant?
Well, Bob, it would really be symbolic. It would also be the United States following Europe, because at least 10 European leaders so far have traveled to Ukraine, to Kyiv itself, and met with President Zelensky. I'm thinking the Lithuanian Prime Minister, the UK Prime Minister, others, to really make that statement that Russia has lost the battle for Kyiv and has been unable to capture the west of the country. So the United States here has to sort of play a little bit of catch up on that PR front, but it wouldn't necessarily make a difference policy-wise. What the United States is looking at this point is how to send someone within a secure way, because the United States and American officials are considered higher risk than other lower-profile officials from other countries. So that comes into the consideration here. Sending, for example, President Biden or the vice president would include an incredible security footprint, and the White House in these discussions, I should say, is considering that, as well as whether it would be better to send the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense. If the message is negotiation, then you send someone in a suit, not in a military uniform. So all these things are being talked about. One of the other big things under consideration is how to reconstitute the U.S. diplomatic presence in country. Remember, American diplomats were pulled out entirely. Other countries like France did keep their diplomats in the country, in the West, in Lviv, in an area that the Russians hadn't really unleashed a full assault yet. So that's being discussed right now, and I know the Ukrainians are really pushing for the United States to come back. It's a boost to morale. It also helps have direct contact with government officials on the ground.
Margaret, a quick follow-up to that assessment and your reporting. When the U.S. makes a calculation here and they look at British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's visit to Ukraine, are there any lessons learned or takeaways from Johnson's visit to Ukraine?
Well, that was certainly a big PR coup for Ukraine. The video, the highly produced rollout of that, that there are obvious critics who would say that it was too much. You didn't see that, for example, with the Lithuanian prime minister or some of the neighboring countries who were a little bit quieter in how they rolled out their visit. But this was a real statement, and it was a statement from a country that is providing serious military support. So that is a calculus, that there is a little bit maybe of competition there, but also the United States thinks of itself as a different actor on the periphery of this conflict. It really wants to stay on the periphery. It does not want to be even, considered accidentally party. And I know that sounds like that's wishful thinking, given the United States is pumping in billions of dollars of weapons and aid. But the goal here is not to escalate, which is why there is an assessment that someone like a Secretary of State might be more appropriate than, for example, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or somebody actively, in uniform. So that's one of the things being talked about here.
Russia's invasion now, Margaret, is now in its 7th week, and you're talking about this tightrope the U.S. is on politically and diplomatically. The U.S. has largely led NATO's response to counter Putin. Now Sweden and Finland, which share borders with Russia, have suggested they could decide on whether to join the military alliance within weeks. What message does this all send, this frenzy of activity on NATO?
Well, this still has to be decided within the Finnish parliament, and it should be within the next few weeks if they want to go ahead with the application. But the very fact we're even having this conversation shows what a sea change there has been in the assessment within Europe of the level of risk posed by Russia. I mean, let's be clear here. It was the absolute horror and fear driven into the hearts of leaders in European capitals when they saw what happened to Ukraine. That is what has changed the thinking and the calculus: fear. And so it has really backfired in some ways on Vladimir Putin. If you indulge his argument, for example, that NATO was somehow a threat to him rather than a defensive alliance, he has now encouraged countries like Finland and Sweden, who have really tried to walk this diplomatic tightrope and not look like they are party to either side. Now they are choosing a side. And what is different about Finland, for example, is it has a large Russian-speaking population. And so if you go with Vladimir Putin's thinking that somehow he needs a sphere of influence among Russian speakers throughout Europe, that is a country that feels perhaps more in the crosshairs, as you pointed out, shares a border there. So it is really going to be interesting to see how Finland's parliament goes forward with that. It also, by the way, is going to create a little bit of an awkward conversation if they go ahead with it, because Ukraine is still standing out in the cold in some ways, you know, saying they're just about giving up on NATO membership ever happening. And President Biden would tell you that's because of past issues, deep issues with corruption, and a government that isn't quite as developed as a democracy as Finland, which could potentially get this fast track.
Margaret, this morning, CIA Director Bill Burns shed some light on Vladimir Putin's thinking. Here's what he said in a speech at Georgia Tech.
I was the U.S. ambassador in Moscow 15 years ago and have watched over the years as Putin has stewed in a combustible combination of grievance and ambition and insecurity. An apostle of payback, he is firmly convinced that the West, especially the United States, took advantage of Russia's moment of historical weakness in the 1990s. His risk appetite has grown as his grip on Russia has tightened. His circle of advisors has narrowed, and in that small circle, it has never been career-enhancing to question his judgment or his stubborn, almost mystical belief that his destiny is to restore Russia's sphere of influence.
So that's the CIA director's assessment. How does this translate, though, into what is happening on the ground?
Well, I always listen extra carefully when it is Director Burns speaking about Russia, because you would be hard-pressed to find anyone within the U.S. government who has that level of past experience one-on-one with Vladimir Putin. And he also is someone who President Biden has turned to in a way that's somewhat unusual for a CIA director, and is often filled in past years by the Secretary of State. For example, Director Burns has briefed President Biden before he's spoken to President Putin and helped him with some of those phone calls. So when Bill Burns gives you insight into Vladimir Putin and the room where the decisions are made, it means something. So his insight here, I think, is really just underscoring that this is a super tight circle around Vladimir Putin that is very hard to pierce, that it is almost ideological in its conviction in terms of this mission in Ukraine, that you have a hard time looking around that room and finding the person who, for example, would break the bad news about that Russian warship that reportedly has sunk, according to Ukraine. And it just shows you what a hard problem set this is to actually get Vladimir Putin to a negotiating table when someone doesn't necessarily have the ability to look at facts for what they are, because he may not be receiving them.
Let's turn, Margaret, to another global issue, access to COVID vaccines. The pandemic is entering an endemic stage here in the U.S., but much of the world remains unvaccinated. Some in Congress are fighting for money to bolster global vaccination programs, but their attempts have largely been unsuccessful. What's your latest reporting on this?
Well, we'll be talking about this on Face the Nation on Sunday, because this is so key right now. One estimate is that you see a new variant of this virus every 4 months, and that it is really ripe for mutation, particularly in areas where there are unvaccinated people. The continent of Africa, for example, low vaccination rates among some of the poorest countries there. Latin America has done a bit better with some of their vaccination rates. But there are large portions of the planet who now have the ability to access billions of dollars worth of vaccine, because you and I, as U.S. taxpayers, purchased those things to donate, but now they can't be delivered because there aren't trained vaccinators or cars to deliver the supply to remote areas. Those are the things that the Biden administration wanted to get $22 billion worth of funding to do. They cut it all the way back to $5 billion, and they couldn't even get the Senate to agree to that for a variety of reasons. And now the hope for the Biden administration is that somehow after Easter break there will be a change of heart, and that an extra $5 billion could be put back into a stalled $10 billion COVID relief package that, as you know, is already wrapped up in a complicated argument about the U.S. border. So right now, the risk of mutation and the slow global vaccination is being wrapped up in our internal politics, and that is deeply concerning to global health officials who are really ringing the alarm bells that those USAID workers, for example, who are helping to put shots in arms in remote places in Africa may have to be laid off because there just simply isn't the funding to pay them.
Margaret Brennan, thank you.